Shattered glass echoing through a dead silent room changes everything. Nia just wanted to finish her double shift, pay her rent, and survive the week. Stepping between a violent millionaire and a terrified girl wasn't on the menu. Now, she's the sudden obsession of Chicago's deadliest syndicate boss. Porcelain plates clattered against the stainless steel counter of O'Connor's Prime, a high-end steakhouse nestled in the wealthy heart of Chicago's Gold Coast. Nia Caldwell wiped a bead of sweat from her deep brown forehead, adjusting the stiff collar of her uniform. At 24, she was used to being invisible. To the politicians, corporate sharks, and trust fund elites who frequented the establishment, a black waitress pouring their $2,000 Bordeaux was simply part of the expensive furniture. Tonight, however, the atmosphere in VIP section felt uniquely suffocating. Sitting at corner booth number 4 was Roman Davies. Roman was a notorious real estate developer with a reputation for sharp suits, bad temperaments, and aggressive behavior fueled by expensive scotch. Beside him sat a young woman who looked completely out of place. Her name, Nia would later learn, was Calantha. Calantha had delicate features, dark hair styled immaculately, and wore a silk designer dress. But her body language screamed sheer panic. She kept her eyes glued to the tablecloth, flinching every time Roman's voice raised an octave. "You think can just dictate terms to me?" Roman snarled, leaning in so close his nose almost brushed Calantha's cheek. His hand gripped his whiskey glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. Nia hovered a few feet away, holding a heavy silver tray carrying a fresh bottle of sparkling water. Her instincts, honed from growing up in the rougher neighborhoods of the South Side, flared to life. The hair on her arm stood up. She glanced at the restaurant manager, Richard, who was deliberately looking the other way, polishing a wine glass with feigned ignorance. No one interfered with a man who tipped in $100 bills, no matter how abusive he became. "Please, Roman, keep your voice down." "My brother will be furious if he finds out we argued in public," Calantha whispered, her voice trembling. "Screw your brother," Roman hissed, slamming his glass onto the table. The sharp crack made several patrons at nearby tables pause, but they quickly averted their eyes. "He thinks he runs this city because he bought a few politicians. But you? You're going to sit here and listen to me." Calantha tried to slide out of the plush leather booth, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm leaving. I can't do this right now." "You aren't going anywhere," Roman growled. He lunged, his large hand wrapping violently around her fragile wrist. He yanked her back into the booth with such force that her shoulders slammed against the mahogany partition. Calantha let out a sharp cry of pain. Roman raised his other hand, curling it into a heavy fist, his face twisted in drunken, malicious rage. Before logic could override her conscience, Nia moved. She didn't think about her overdue electricity bill, or the fact that she desperately needed this job to cover her younger sister's tuition. She only saw a woman about to be battered in a room full of cowards. With 3 quick strides, Nia positioned herself directly between Roman and Calantha. She didn't try to grab Roman. Instead, she brought her heavy, solid, silver serving tray up like a shield. Clang. Roman's descending fist slammed hard into the silver tray. The impact vibrated up Nia's arms, but she held her ground, her dark eyes locking onto his bloodshot ones with unwavering ferocity. The bottle of sparkling water tipped and shattered on the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the suddenly silent restaurant. "Don't," Nia said, her voice low, steady, and commanding. It carried a weight that demanded absolute compliance. "Take your hands off her. Now." Roman stumbled back, clutching his bruised knuckles. He stared at Nia in pure disbelief, his arrogant brain struggling to comprehend that a waitress had just physically blocked him. "Are you out of your mind?" He spat, his face flushing crimson. "Do you have any idea who I am, you stupid?" "I don't care if you're the mayor," Nia interrupted, her tone frigid. She kept the tray positioned defensively, turning her head slightly toward the trembling girl. "Miss, are you all right? Do you want me to call a cab?" Calantha, pale and shaking, nodded frantically. She scrambled out of the booth, clutching her designer purse. "You're dead!" Roman screamed at Nia, taking a step forward. "I'll have your job. I'll ruin your pathetic life." "Is there a problem here?" Richard, the manager, finally scurried over, his face pale with terror. He looked at the shattered glass, at Roman's furious face, and then glared at Nia. "Nia, What is the meaning of this? Apologize to Mr. Davies immediately. He was going to hit her, Nia stated calmly, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She assaulted me! Roman lied smoothly, adjusting his jacket. This crazy bitch hit me with a tray! I want her fired, Richard. Right now. Or I'm making sure this place gets shut down by the health department tomorrow. Richard didn't even hesitate. Nia, you're done. Hand in your apron. Get out. You'll not see a dime of this week's pay. Nia felt a cold pit open in her stomach, but she refused to let Roman see her break. She lowered the tray, placed it carefully on an empty table, and untied her black apron. She dropped it at Richard's feet. Fine. But you're a coward, Richard. Without another word, Nia turned and walked out the brass-handled front doors into the brisk Chicago night air. As she stood on the pavement, wrapping her thin coat around herself, a black town car pulled up to the curb. The rear window rolled down just an inch. Wait, a soft voice called out. Nia stepped closer. It was Calantha. The young woman slipped a thick, embossed business card through the crack in the window. You saved me tonight. I won't forget this. Please, take this. Nia took the card. It was completely blank, except for a single phone number, printed in sleek silver foil. Before Nia could ask anything, the tinted window rolled up, and the car sped away into the dark. The walk back to her cramped apartment on the fringes of the South Side took an hour. By the time Nia turned the lock on her door, the adrenaline had completely faded, replaced by a crushing wave of anxiety. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the blank business card under the dim, flickering overhead light. Rent was due in 4 days. She had $42 in her checking account. Playing the hero had just cost her the only lifeline she had. She tossed the card into the trash can. She wasn't looking for charity, and she definitely didn't want to get further involved with the chaotic lives of wealthy socialites. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her worn-out mattress and fell into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. The next morning, a sharp, rhythmic knocking jolted her awake. Nia groaned, glancing at the digital clock. In her neighborhood, unexpected morning visitors were rarely selling Girl Scout cookies. When she peered through the scratched peephole, she froze. Standing in her dingy hallway were two massive men in impeccably tailored charcoal suits. They didn't look like cops, and they certainly didn't look like debt collectors. They looked like professional violence wrapped in Italian wool. Roman, she thought, her blood running cold. He said he would ruin my life. He sent his goons. Taking a deep breath, Nia unbolted the door but kept the chain engaged. What do you want? The man in the front, a tall, severe-looking European man, spoke in a polite but unyielding tone. Miss Caldwell, my name is Dominic. My employer requests your presence immediately. I don't know who your employer is, but you can tell Roman Davies to go to hell, Nia snapped, preparing to slam the door. Dominic didn't flinch. We do not work for Roman Davies. We work for the man who is currently ensuring Mr. Davies can no longer use his right hand. Please, Miss Caldwell, it is a matter of your own safety. A car is waiting. Nia hesitated. The man's words chilled her to the bone. Ensuring he can no longer use his right hand? Curiosity and a primal sense of survival warred within her. If they wanted to hurt her, a flimsy chain lock wouldn't stop them. Cautiously, she closed the door, unlatched the chain, and stepped out. 10 minutes later, Nia was sitting in the back of a black Maybach, watching the dilapidated buildings of her neighborhood morph into the sprawling, manicured estates of Winnetka. The car finally glided through a set of towering wrought iron gates, pulling up to a modern, glass and stone mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. Dominic escorted her inside, past a half-dozen heavily armed guards trying to blend into the scenery. The interior was breathtakingly austere, minimalist, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. She was led into an expansive office at the back of the house. Standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the crashing gray waves of the lake, was a man. He turned around as she entered, and the air in the room seemed to immediately drop 10 degrees. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark, piercing eyes, and an aura of absolute authority. He wore a crisp black dress shirt, The sleeves rolled up to reveal a complex sleeve of dark ink winding down his left forearm. Though he utilized a strictly Western name for business, his Korean heritage was evident in his striking features. This was Arthur Sterling, the ghost of Chicago, the man who owned the city's underground, operating a massive syndicate masked behind a dozen legitimate corporate fronts. Miss Caldwell, Arthur said. His voice was a rich, smooth baritone that commanded the room effortlessly. Please, have a seat. Nia stood her ground. I prefer to stand. Who are you, and why am I here? A faint, almost imperceptible smirk ghosted across Arthur's lips. He admired fearlessness. My name is Arthur Sterling. Calantha is my younger sister. Nia's eyes widened slightly. My brother will be furious, Calantha had said. I brought you here to thank you, Arthur continued, walking slowly toward a heavy oak desk and leaning against it. Roman Davies is a reckless fool who let his ego outpace his intelligence. My sister is protected under my family's banner. Anyone who lays a finger on her forfeits their life. You intervened when my own shadows failed to act fast enough. I just did what anyone should have done, Nia said defensively, crossing her arms. I don't want any reward. I just want to be left alone. Unfortunately, Arthur said, his tone darkening. That is no longer an option. Sit down, Nia. This time, it wasn't a request. The raw command in his voice made her legs comply, and she sank into a leather armchair. Roman Davies is not just a wealthy developer, Arthur explained, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He walked over and handed one to her. She didn't drink. He is heavily connected to the Lucchese faction operating out of the West Side. By humiliating him in a public space and by my subsequent retaliation against him this morning, you have inadvertently stepped into a war. Nia's heart plummeted. What are you talking about? Roman's pride is shattered, Arthur said plainly. He cannot strike directly at me yet. So, an hour ago, he put a bounty on the waitress, who struck him with a silver tray. He intends to make an example of you to send a message to me. Are you insane? Nia stood up, her voice rising in panic. I don't have anything to do with your Mafia turf wars. I serve steaks. I'm just a normal person. You need to call them off. I cannot call off men who do not answer to me, Arthur said calmly, taking a slow sip of his drink. He watched her intently, analyzing her every movement. But I honor my debts. You protected my blood. Therefore, you are now under my protection. I don't want your protection, Nia shot back. I'll go to the police. The police captain works for the Lucchese family, Arthur replied, without missing a beat. If you go to the precinct, you will be dead before you finish filling out the paperwork. You have exactly one option to survive the coming week, Miss Caldwell. Arthur pushed away from the desk, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches away. He towered over her, his scent, a mix of expensive cologne and dangerous intent. You belong to the Sterling compound now. You will live here. You will work directly for me. And in exchange, anyone who comes looking for the black waitress from O'Connor's Prime will find me instead. He tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Do we have an understanding? Survival was a language Nia spoke fluently, but the dialect of the ultra-rich criminal underworld was entirely foreign to her. For the first 3 days, the Sterling estate felt less like a sanctuary and more like a high-tech mausoleum. Security cameras tracked her every movement across the imported marble floors. Stoic guards in tailored suits, men who looked like they would snap a neck as easily as they would light a cigarette, stood at every exit. Nia had a suite larger than her entire apartment, a closet filled with clothes purchased overnight in her exact size, and a personal chef. Yet, she felt like a canary locked in a diamond-encrusted cage. Arthur Sterling was a phantom in his own home. He left before dawn and returned long after midnight, his presence only marked by the lingering scent of sandalwood and the hushed, urgent tones of his lieutenants in the downstairs study. By the 4th morning, Nia's patience evaporated. She was a woman who worked double shifts to survive. Sitting idle while a mob war brewed over her existence was driving her insane. She marched out of her suite, ignoring the massive bodyguard stationed by the stairs, and headed straight for Arthur's private office. She pushed the heavy oak doors open without knocking. Arthur was seated behind his massive desk, reviewing a stack of documents. Dominic, his imposing right-hand man, stood nearby. Both men looked up, genuine surprise flashing across Arthur's usually unreadable face. I am not a pet, Nia announced, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. She planted her hands on the edge of his desk, leaning in. Her dark, natural curls were pulled back into a tight puff, highlighting the fierce determination in her deep brown eyes. I appreciate you keeping me alive, but I refuse to sit in that room staring at the wall while you fight a war. Put me to work. Dominic shifted, his hand instinctively resting near the holster concealed under his jacket. Arthur simply raised a single finger, silently commanding Dominic to stand down. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. His dark eyes swept over her, calculating and intensely focused. This is not a restaurant, Miss Caldwell. My businesses deal in international shipping, real estate acquisition, and dispute resolution. What exactly do you propose you do? I manage the inventory, bookkeeping, and payroll for a restaurant that cleared $3 million a year because the manager was too incompetent to do it himself. Nia shot back, refusing to break eye contact. I am smart. I notice things. You have files piled up on that side desk that look like they haven't been touched in weeks. Give me an audit. Let me earn my keep. A heavy silence descended over the room. For a long moment, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Then, the corner of Arthur's mouth twitched upward into a genuine, rare smile. It transformed his face, softening the harsh, aristocratic lines and revealing the devastating charm that usually remained hidden. Dominic, Arthur said, his eyes never leaving Nia's. Give her access to the secondary financial servers. Let her look at the logistics manifests for the South Loop warehouses. Sir, those files contain sensitive. Do it, Arthur commanded softly. For the next week, Nia traded her waitress apron for a laptop and a desk in the mansion's sprawling library. She threw herself into the numbers, losing herself in spreadsheets and cargo manifests. It was a welcome distraction from the looming threat of Roman Davies and the Lucchese family. During this time, Calantha became her only real anchor. The younger Sterling sibling frequently visited the library, bringing pots of Earl Grey tea and an infectious, nervous energy. Arthur was never supposed to take over the family business, Calantha revealed one rainy afternoon, curled up in a velvet armchair. He was studying architecture in London. But then, our parents' car was rigged with explosives when I was 10. Arthur came back, dropped everything, and systematically eradicated the people responsible. He's ruthless because he had to keep us safe. Calantha looked at Nia with profound gratitude. That's why he won't let anything happen to you. You protected his family. To Arthur, loyalty is a religion. Nia absorbed this, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. It complicated the image she had of the terrifying mafia boss. It made him human. It made him dangerous to her heart. Later that evening, as thunderstorms battered the glass windows of the library, Nia noticed a pattern. It wasn't obvious it was buried under layers of corporate jargon and dummy corporations, but her sharp eyes caught the discrepancy. 3 specific shipping routes under the Sterling Logistics umbrella consistently reported spoilage or customs confiscation. Exactly 2 days before Lucchese-owned businesses suddenly flooded the black market with high-end electronics and pharmaceuticals. Furthermore, the financial records showed a slow, steady hemorrhage of funds being rerouted to an offshore account. Nia cross-referenced the employee authorization codes. Every single altered manifest and diverted wire transfer had been authorized by one man, Silas Montgomery, Arthur's chief financial advisor. There was a mole, and he was sitting at Arthur's right hand. Nia didn't wait for morning. Clenching the damning printed documents in her hands, she navigated the estate's dark, winding corridors toward Arthur's private wing. Her heart drummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her resolve was absolute. She found him on the terrace of his bedroom, a lone figure smoking against the backdrop of a turbulent, moonlit Lake Michigan. He wore only dark trousers and a crisp white undershirt, the biting cold wind doing nothing to chill the intricate, dark ink winding down his left forearm. He looked like a fallen king, burdened and entirely solitary. You should be asleep, Nia, he murmured, his back still turned to her. Silas Montgomery is stealing from you, Nia said. She stepped out onto the freezing stone and shoved the thick manila folder directly against his chest. Arthur turned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He took the folder, holding it up to the dim exterior light. As his dark eyes tracked the highlighted authorization codes and diverted funds she had meticulously uncovered, the air around him seemed to turn to ice. The brooding, quiet man vanished, replaced instantly by the apex predator of Chicago's underworld. He's leaking your shipment schedules to the Lucchese faction, Nia explained, her voice remarkably steady, despite the terrifying shift in his demeanor. They aren't intercepting your trucks by chance. Silas is handing them the keys, and he's skimming off your operational funds to build his own retirement nest egg. Arthur closed the folder slowly, the sound loud in the quiet night. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Silas has been with my family for 15 years, Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. If you are wrong, Nia, the consequences for accusing a made man of treason are severe. Math doesn't lie. Nia stood tall, her rich skin catching the pale moonlight, refusing to back down. Men do. Arthur stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The fierce, calculating intensity in his gaze shifted into something raw, undeniable, and deeply admiring. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing her cheek. The sudden, tender contact sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine, a stark contrast to the violence surrounding them. You are extraordinary, he murmured. Just as quickly, his emotional armor snapped back into place. Get dressed. We are going to a charity gala at the Field Museum tonight. Silas will be there. So will Roman Davies. I want Silas to see. I am entirely distracted by my beautiful new companion. It will make him careless. 3 hours later, Calantha's stylist had transformed the exhausted waitress into a vision of high society elegance. Nia wore a floor-length, emerald green silk gown that hugged her curves flawlessly. A simple but blindingly expensive diamond necklace rested heavily against her collarbone, a physical reminder of the world she was stepping into. When she descended the grand staircase, Arthur was waiting in the foyer, in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. Seeing her, his breath audibly hitched. The untouchable syndicate boss looked entirely undone by the sight of her. You look stunning, he managed, his voice a low, rough gravel. Keep close to me tonight. The Field Museum Gala was a sea of false smiles, clinking crystal, and whispered threats. Towering dinosaur skeletons cast monstrous shadows over the pristine marble floors, a fitting metaphor for the predators mingling below. Nia stayed glued to Arthur's side. She felt the malicious stares of Lucchese associates and the arrogant, furious glare of Roman Davies, whose arm was heavily encased in a cast. Arthur had kept his word about Roman's hand. Halfway through the evening, Arthur leaned down, his breath brushing her ear and sending a shiver through her body. Silas just slipped toward the restricted archives. He thinks he's meeting his handler. Come. They abandoned the glittering ballroom, slipping past security into the dimly lit archive corridors that smelled strongly of dust and preservation chemicals. As they rounded a blind corner, the trap sprang. 4 men in heavy tactical gear stepped from the shadows, raising suppressed automatic weapons. Silas stood safely behind them, a desperate, greedy sneer on his face. Sorry, Arthur, Silas spat. Davies pays better. Get down, Arthur roared. He shoved Nia hard behind a steel-reinforced display crate just as the first bullets hissed through the air, shattering ancient pottery into 1,000 pieces. Arthur drew a sleek handgun in a blur, dropping the first 2 men with terrifying, clinical precision. But they were heavily pinned down, and Silas's men were advancing. Nia's heart hammered wildly. She was unarmed, wearing stilettos, and trapped in a lethal crossfire. But survival was her native language. Scanning the dark space, she spotted the main electrical breaker panel 3 feet away. Next to her rested a heavy, solid bronze statue of an Egyptian cat. Without hesitating, Nia grabbed the heavy bronze, kicked off her heels, and lunged forward. She swung the statue with every ounce of her strength, smashing it directly into the electrical panel. Sparks showered the hallway. The entire archive plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The gunfire paused in sheer confusion. In the dark, Arthur Sterling was a ghost. Nia crouched, listening to the sickening thud of bodies hitting the floor, followed by an eerie, heavy silence. Suddenly, a warm, strong hand clamped over her mouth, and an arm wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against a hard, familiar chest. It's me, Arthur breathed into her hair. The emergency backup lights buzzed on, casting a dim, sickly glow. The remaining gunmen were dead. Silas was on his knees, clutching a bleeding shoulder in pure terror. Arthur ignored the traitor entirely. He looked down at Nia, who was trembling, her emerald dress covered in dust, still gripping the bronze cat like a weapon. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice shaking with a raw, desperate emotion. He cupped her face with both hands, frantically checking her for injuries. I'm okay, Nia gasped, dropping the heavy statue to the floor. I'm okay. The overwhelming proximity, the adrenaline of survival, and the profound relief shattered their final, lingering wall. Arthur crashed his lips onto hers. The kiss was desperate, bruising, and entirely consuming. Nia gasped into his mouth, her hands tangling fiercely in his hair. It tasted of danger and intoxicating relief. Breaking apart, Arthur rested his forehead against hers, his eyes blazing with absolute certainty. You, he whispered fiercely, are never going back to your old life. You're mine now. Silas groaned on the cold marble floor of the archives, his hand tightly clutching his ruined shoulder. Crimson stained his pristine white shirt, spreading like a dark ink blot. Arthur's demeanor had shifted entirely. The tender, vulnerable man who had just kissed Nia with such desperate fervor vanished, replaced instantly by the icy, calculating syndicate leader. Stepping away from Nia, Arthur stood over his former mentor. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply stared down with a quiet, terrifying authority. 15 years, Silas, Arthur said softly, the echo of his voice bouncing off the ancient stone walls. You ate at my table. You knew my parents. And you sold me to Davies for a retirement fund? You were losing focus, Arthur. Silas wheezed, his face pale with shock and pain. You let a nobody waitress dictate operations. Davies promised me 30% of the Southside ports. The Lucchese family backed him. You can't win this. They already have the advantage. Nia stepped forward, the heavy bronze cat still resting near her feet. What advantage? Your men are dead. Silas let out a wet, rattling laugh. Do you honestly think this was the main event? This was just a distraction. To get the ghost out of his castle. Arthur's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles jumped beneath his skin. Calantha. Gideon unlocked the front gates 10 minutes ago. Silas smiled, his teeth stained red. Davies is there right now. He didn't just want you dead, Arthur. He wanted the girl. He wants to finish the argument he started at that restaurant. Without a second of hesitation, Arthur raised his weapon and incapacitated Silas completely, ending the threat with a single, muffled strike from the handle of his gun. He grabbed Nia's hand, his grip tight and urgent. We need to move. Now, Arthur commanded. They sprinted through the labyrinth of the Field Museum, slipping out through a designated service exit where Dominic had secured a secondary vehicle, a reinforced black SUV. Dominic took one look at Arthur's face and didn't ask questions. He threw the keys to his boss and slid into the passenger seat, loading a heavy tactical rifle. Nia climbed into the back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The drive from the museum to the Winnetka estate was a blur of flashing streetlights and tearing tires. Arthur drove like a man possessed, weaving through the late-night Chicago traffic at speeds exceeding 100 miles an hour. The silence in the car was absolute, thick with dread and unspoken fears. Nia clutched the leather seat, praying she wasn't too late to save the girl who had offered her kindness in a world of cruelty. When they reached the private road leading to the Sterling compound, Arthur cut the headlights. They rolled toward the massive wrought iron gates in complete darkness. The gates were wide open. 3 of Arthur's perimeter guards lay motionless on the manicured lawn. The front doors of the mansion were splintered, hanging off their heavy brass hinges. Dominic, take the east wing. Secure the armory, Arthur whispered, checking his sidearm. He turned to look at Nia in the rearview mirror. His dark eyes were filled with a fierce, protective terror. Stay in this car. Lock the doors. If I do not come out in 10 minutes, put it in drive and do not stop until you reach the safe house in Evanston. No, Nia said firmly, reaching for the door handle. Nia, this is not a negotiation, Arthur snapped, his voice sharp. There are trained killers in my house. And Calantha is in there, Nia countered, kicking off the remnants of her broken high heels so she was barefoot. You need someone who can move quietly. I know the blind spots of the camera system because I audited the security budget yesterday. You take the main halls, I'll take the servant corridors. We flank them. Arthur stared at her. In her torn emerald dress, barefoot, with fierce determination radiating from her dark skin and blazing eyes, she looked like an absolute goddess of war. He realized, in that fraction of a second, that he could no more control her than he could control the tide. Keep your head down, Arthur finally murmured. If you see a threat, you hide. Do you understand? Nia nodded. They slipped into the sprawling mansion like shadows. The house was unnervingly quiet, save for the distant sound of shattering glass from the upper floors. Nia broke away from Arthur at the grand staircase, slipping behind a heavy oak door that led into the narrow, unlit servant hallways. She moved with practiced silence, a skill honed from years of avoiding her landlord and navigating dangerous neighborhoods after midnight. She could hear heavy footsteps pacing in the main dining room. She crept toward a grated air vent, peering through the slats. Inside the dining room, the situation was a nightmare. Calantha was forced onto her knees, her face tear-stained and terrified. Standing behind her, gripping her dark hair, was Roman Davies. His right arm was still immobilized in a cast, but his left hand held a heavy silver revolver, the barrel pressed directly against Calantha's temple. Gideon, Arthur's traitorous head of security, stood by the doorway with two Lucchese enforcers. Where is the safe combination, you little brat? Roman hissed, yanking Calantha's hair. Your brother keeps the offshore ledgers here. Tell me, or I blow your brains all over this expensive rug. I don't know, Calantha sobbed, trembling violently. Nia's mind raced. She was unarmed. She was outnumbered. But she had an advantage they didn't. She knew the house's smart grid. During her audit, she had downloaded the estate's management app to her phone to review utility expenditures. Crouching in the dark hallway, Nia pulled out her phone. The screen cast a faint glow on her face. She bypassed the security protocols using Gideon's own override codes, which she had noticed he carelessly left written on a sticky note in the security booth 3 days prior. She navigated to the environmental controls. Target, main dining room. Action, engage emergency fire suppression. Nia pressed execute. Instantly, a deafening, high-pitched klaxon alarm ripped through the silence of the mansion. Before Roman or his men could react, the ceiling panels in the dining room dropped open. High-pressure nozzles blasted a blinding, freezing wave of thick white chemical foam and water directly into the room. Chaos erupted. What the hell is this? Roman screamed, dropping his hold on Calantha as the foam blinded him. The Lucchese enforcers stumbled backward, slipping on the suddenly slick marble floors, coughing as the chemical retardant filled the air. The distraction lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was all Arthur needed. Bursting through the double doors like a force of nature, Arthur didn't hesitate. He took out the two Lucchese enforcers with 2 muffled, precise shots. Gideon tried to raise his rifle, but Dominic, having flanked from the east wing, stepped into the doorway and neutralized the traitor with a swift strike to the chest. Roman, covered in white foam, panicked. He blindly swung his revolver toward where he thought Calantha was kneeling, but Calantha wasn't there. Nia had burst from the servants' entrance the moment the foam deployed, sliding across the wet floor. She grabbed Calantha by the waist and dragged the younger girl behind the massive, overturned mahogany dining table just as Roman's bullet shattered a crystal chandelier above them. Davies! Arthur's voice roared over the blaring alarm, a sound so full of absolute authority it froze Roman in his tracks. The emergency system clicked off, leaving the room dripping, ruined, and dead silent, save for the heavy breathing of the survivors. Roman wiped the foam from his eyes, blinking rapidly. He found himself staring down the barrel of Arthur's weapon. He was completely alone. His men were down. His inside man was gone. You're dead, Sterling, Roman spat, though his voice wavered with undeniable terror. The Lucchese family. The Lucchese boss sent me a message 10 minutes ago, Arthur interrupted smoothly, stepping over the ruined furniture. When Silas failed at the museum, Carmine Lucchese realized you were a liability. You promised him a swift victory. You delivered a massacre of his men. You are no longer under their protection, Roman. You are just a dead man standing in my dining room. Roman's face drained of all color. He dropped the revolver. It clattered uselessly onto the wet floor. Wait, Arthur, we can negotiate. I have properties in the Gold Coast. I have liquid assets. Arthur didn't lower his weapon. He turned his head slightly, looking at Nia, who was holding a shaking Calantha safely in her arms. Nia's dark eyes met Arthur's. There was no fear in her expression anymore, only a profound, steady resolve. She nodded once. Arthur turned back to Roman. You disrespected my sister. You hunted the woman who protected her. There is no negotiation. The ensuing silence was broken by a single, definitive crack. Roman Davies collapsed, and the threat to the Sterling family was permanently eradicated. 6 months later, O'Connor's Prime was still bustling, the clatter of porcelain and the hum of wealthy patrons filling the air. Richard, the manager, scurried around nervously, ensuring the VIP section was pristine. A rumor had circulated that the new owners of the building were coming for a surprise inspection. The brass front doors opened, and a hush immediately fell over the room. Arthur Sterling stepped inside, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit, his presence commanding absolute silence. But it was the woman beside him who drew every eye in the establishment. Nia Caldwell wore a tailored, deep crimson blazer and matching trousers that contrasted beautifully with her glowing, flawless, dark skin. Her curls were styled in an elegant, voluminous halo. Diamonds glittered at her ears and on her left ring finger. She moved with a grace and confidence that made her look like royalty. She was no longer a waitress struggling to pay rent. She was the financial architect of the Sterling Empire, legally transitioning their assets into legitimate tech and real estate ventures, and standing fiercely beside the most dangerous man in Chicago as his equal. Richard turned completely white, dropping a menu, and Nia paused, looking at her former manager with a calm, unnerving smile. Hello, Richard. I believe we need to discuss the renewal of your lease. My husband and I are raising the rent. Arthur wrapped a possessive warm arm around Nia's waist, pulling her close. He pressed a kiss to her temple, entirely uncaring of the staring elite. Whatever the queen wants, Arthur murmured. Nia leaned into him, the ghosts of her past completely shattered, replaced by an unbreakable reign. Did Nia's journey from an invisible waitress to the untouchable queen of Chicago's underworld leave you breathless? If you loved this thrilling tale of loyalty, romance, and mafia justice, smash that like button and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired drama and jaw-dropping stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have risked it all to save a stranger?